Welcome to another edition of Wildcat Country. Eric Cohen and Shane Dale. You know, it's the end of June, and there's still a lot of stuff to talk about. I know we harp on it every week, but there's always something going on. Especially, I think it's time, Shane, for a big debate at the end of this first segment. And we're only going to do two segments today. We have the Professor Matt Moreno going to join us in the second segment, but I was going to make it its own segment. I'm not going to tease it yet, but you and I are absolutely on opposing sides of an important discussion that is polarizing to Arizona fans. What is it? You'll find out in the next few minutes. But
I don't know how important it is, but yes, it is a bit polarizing.
I think it's important. I think the reason I think it's important is because I believe that history has a tendency to repeat itself.
Okay.
And I'll leave it at that. That's an amazing tease.
Outstanding tease.
All right, let's get into it. It is Buy or Sell, presented by our friends at Ice Shaker. Go to iceshaker.com, use promo code Wildcat Country, capital W, capital C. Get one of these beautiful things behind me and Shane. They have the half-gallon jugs. They have just the regular ones. You can also get them at fanatics.com. These things are amazing, especially if you're a golfer like me who loves to be out on the course. They come in handy big time this
We need
summer.
some photos of you out on the course enjoying your Ice Shaker.
Yes, might be a little too hot for me to look like I'm enjoying anything.
Well, no, but Chris will enjoy. Will appreciate it, and he'll retweet it, and he'll keep us, and it keeps our sponsor happy, Eric.
I will see what I can do. All right, Shane. Number one, considering that he went undrafted, it was the wrong move for Azuolas Tubelis to leave Arizona. Let
me fire the question back at you. Do you think if Tubelis had returned for one more year, it would have improved his draft stock?
Probably not, but he would have gotten paid probably more money than, unless he goes to Europe.
Well, and there's I don't
be on a two-way.
And the NIL stuff is tricky with the international players too. Although I think there was a path for Tubelis to get some, but I'm going to sell it just because I think the problem for Tubelis is he's sort of in no man's land in terms of the NBA. He's not really built to play the four in the NBA. At least at the college level, he could play the four offensively well.
Yeah.
Not so much defensively. I'm not sure he's really capable of playing either in the NBA long term. And I don't really think he's a natural small forward either. He's not a very good outside shooter. And you have to be a good shooter to be on the court anyway in the NBA, regardless of what position you play now. Even center sometimes, as we just saw in the NBA Finals. So I don't know if another year at Arizona would have changed anything. With that said, he did sign with the 76ers. And we know that another undrafted Arizona Wildcat, another Arizona Wildcat who went undrafted and made a name for himself with the Sixers. So you never know. I wish him the best, but I don't think another year in Tucson would have made much of a difference.
I'm going to say it was the wrong move. I'm going to buy this one. I'll tell you why. I think if Tubelis comes back, he's the favorite for Pac-12 Player of the Year. It could have gotten him some added exposure. I believe that it very likely could have been drafted and had a better options as far as the NBA goes. I know he'll play in the summer league, but I believe that Tubelis would have been a strong favorite for Pac-12 Player of the Year, coming back as a senior who would have averaged 20 plus points a game on a strong team, probably the favorite in the conference. It's not like a definitive buy, but it's somewhat of a buy.
I wish I had the tweet in front of me, but it's some people made an example of Tubelis and Drew Timme, who was all West Coast Conference everything and didn't get drafted. And you can put up big numbers in college, and then a guy like
sure,
look at Devin Booker, who came off the bench in Kentucky, and he's so I don't. You can talk about all the numbers in college you want, but if you're just not NBA material, you're not NBA. I'm not saying he's not. He still could do well there. I think there's a reason why he went undrafted, and I don't think another year in college would have changed that.
Okay, that's fair. We can agree to disagree. It's not like a strong buy for me, but just it wouldn't hurt if he had come
maybe
back.
He would have snuck into the second round. Maybe I don't know. It's all right.
Number two. Last week we had Pete Futak on the show from College Football News. Great interview. If you haven't heard that, take a listen to it. So he said last year, on the last episode, what's the big deal over like $10 million or less as part of a TV deal from the Pac-12 versus the Big 12? So if all things were being equal, does $10 million, if exposure was the same and everything else was the same, but Arizona was getting up to $10 million less for now by staying in the Pac-12, is that enough to make a move? buy or sell?
Percentage wise, 10 million is big. If we're talking about the same thing, because I think the payout per school last year in the Pac-12 was about estimated 37 million a year.
Yeah.
Last year for the Pac-12. 10 million is a big drop off percentage wise. That's over a quarter of revenue there. Would you need, especially like,
so what's the number? What's the number? All right. So if 10 million, but what is the number where it's not a big deal? How about I rephrase the question?
Well, so the Big 12 got between 42 and 45 estimated.
I thought it was less. I thought it was like 30 that they.
I was looking. I'm going off an article at your employer, CBS Sports, that went down the list here. It's a couple of months old, so maybe it's possible that things have adjusted since then. And the SEC and Big 10 got more than that. So I think I need something in that ballpark. I know. So John Wilner said he thinks the Pac-12 could announce a deal that includes, a media deal that includes San Diego State and SMU coming on before football media day, Pac-12 media day in a few weeks. So that would include a couple of big markets, San Diego and Dallas. I like Pete's suggestion of adding UNLV simply because, by the way, I like what you said. Pete had some great comments on the Pac-12 Big 12 situation, and he gave me a new perspective. But I love the idea of adding UNLV as well because of the growing Las Vegas market. I can't imagine those schools would move the needle much in terms of TV revenue. So 10 million a year, that's if you're talking about per year, that's a lot of money. So no, I think that's a bigger deal than maybe you're making it out to be.
Okay. So for me, I think if all things are equal, Shane, I mean, if everything is equal, I've now changed my tune. I would say stay in the Pac-12, in the Pac-10, Pac-12.
So we have flipped here in the last.
I'll admit it. I think the academic part I never considered. I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that Arizona's probably going to still play late games. Regardless, if the TV deal was significantly better, whereas Arizona was going to get more exposure in the Big 12, I think you have to make the deal. And I think part of that, to me. And I know that you sent me a tweet, off air earlier today.
Yeah,
that pretty much said that a corner school, Pac-12
corner school,
corner schools,
probably
one of their administrators said pretty much, if we go to the Big 12, we want more exposure than we're getting in this conference.
Yeah, because they said it would make no sense to move if we're getting less exposure than BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, or UCF. Which absolutely, that's a great point. And the source here, take it for what it's worth. It's as far as whether it's a credible source, it probably is. But I think that makes sense. It's that they want to stay in the Pac-12, and it's a big, major pain in the rear end to switch conferences. There's a lot of things to consider academically, like you said, and athletically, but it's an option they've explored. And so if you could do something like where the Pac-12 adds some big markets, San Diego, Dallas, Las Vegas, maybe one other, then maybe it makes sense to stick around because you're losing. Both LA schools is a massive, massive hit.
I agree.
And so you're not going to make that all up. But if you added, say, I don't know how many teams are in the mix, but if you added 4 teams, San Diego State, SMU, UNLV, and maybe one other in a big market, then I could wrap my head around staying in the Pac-12, and I could wrap my head around the possibility that they're going to get about the same amount of money in a TV deal than they did last time around.
Yeah, I think that if the money is within a few $1 million, maybe 10 is too much. You might be right, Shane. But if it's within a few $1 million, I'm probably staying. And Pete made a great point on that. If you haven't taken a listen to that, as I said, listen to our show last week. All right. So number 3, then kind of tag teaming with that last point. If you were Arizona, you would not, under any circumstances, sign a grant of rights deal to keep this conference together for at least the next 5 to 7 years. Doesn't matter what the TV deal looks like. You're not signing that. You want to keep your options open.
As much as I'd like Arizona to move to the Big 12, I think if they're going to stay with the Pac-12, they need to make it some commitment. It needs to be, in the long term, or at least the semi-long term, which I guess would be considered 5 to 7 years. I think you need that commitment just for certainty for a number of reasons. Not the least of which is, if Jedd Fisch continues to have success in Arizona, we hope he does, decides to leave for another school, Arizona's future is in one conference or another is in flux. Could that make it trickier to bring another top head coach in to replace him? We saw what, it's not exactly the same situation, but you saw Lincoln Riley, as soon as Oklahoma declared they're going to go to the SEC, he bolts to USC. Coincidence? I don't know. But that's the kind of thing you got to think about. So now I think regardless of what they do, they need to make a commitment. And if it's the Pac-12, they need some financial and athletic certainty one way or the other.
I'm going to sell this one. I think that if the deal is good enough, I think you sign a grant of rights. I think you do for 5 to 7 years. Now, I wouldn't go beyond that. Like, I wouldn't go much beyond the early 2030s. Yeah. A lot can change in the next 8 years. I would not sign a 30-year deal like the ACC members did. That is an utter disaster. But I think 5 to 7 years, if Oregon and Washington are willing to sign it, I would as well if I was Arizona. I think the thing that I thought about, Shane, basically in looking at the Big 12, it's kind of fun to think about the different matchups that Arizona would play, the different opponents that they would play. You know, the BYUs and the, Oklahoma States, Houston. I mean, those are kind of fun. But at the same time, Arizona would automatically be the best academic school in the conference. Do you want that? Is that a good thing for Arizona? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how much that would drag Arizona down academically, and I know that that's a big consideration that we maybe didn't talk about as much as we should have. But certainly the matchups. I think most fans get more excited on the men's basketball side of things because of the possibilities of having just epic games in McHale Center with Kansas and with some other teams in the Big 12. But obviously football is what steers the ship. But there could be some great matchups there. I conceded your point months ago about, okay, what are the matchups you're going to miss if they if they leave the Pac-12? Obviously we want to keep the rivalry with ASU going, but after that, are there a lot of really deep-seated rivalries in football for Arizona? The answer is not really. So while, games against Oregon, they've had some great upset wins over Oregon and Utah and Colorado are kind of new, so it's newish. So there's really not that history there. So, and just the fact that Arizona is not a perennially good football program, it's kind of hard to build up those exciting rivalries. So from that perspective, I agree that, the move to the Big 12 would be ideal, but the academic side of things is not talked about as much. And that's obviously a big concern.
Let me rephrase this. Let me just, I guess, make the point here. If Arizona were to move to the, if they were to move to the Big 12, like, I'm not upset about that. I'm okay with that. I understand it. If they stay in the Pac-10, 12, whatever it is, and the money is good and the exposure is fairly good, I get that as well. Where I would get upset is if they were to stay in this conference and they were to get a brutal TV deal with the CW as their biggest station, no ESPN, no CBS, no NBC, no Turner. I mean, you're bottom of the barrel. I don't think that's going to happen. I have no issue with a streaming deal with with Amazon, but you have to have a prime partner in there, in my opinion.
Yeah, my biggest concern is that, the Pac-12 is already kind of, as far as Power 5 football schools, a Power 5 football conference, it's already looked down on a bit. Rarely is the Pac-12 in the college football playoff picture. And then when you take away UCLA and USC, like how relevant can this conference stay? Like perception wise, as a power conference. On men's basketball, I'm not as concerned just because you see what a lot of other teams have been able to do. Like Gonzaga has been able to be great in the West Coast Conference and be competitive in March most of the time. So, but in football, I have no illusions that Arizona is going to become a college football playoff contender under Jedd Fisch. But it's nice. It'd be nice to have that possibility of maybe a New Year's Six game again, which Arizona has done. Mm-hmm. If you can get to that level, the odds of you being considered for that kind of spot it's higher if you have a higher level of competition and you're just more respected nationally. And the Pac-12 already has trouble getting that respect for competition reasons, for people not staying up late enough to watch the conference, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just going to be you replace USC and UCLA with San Diego State and SMU. It's just going to be that much more of an uphill battle.
All right. So we kind of teased this already, Shane, but I want to get right into it. This is kind of our bonus question. We're not going to do a third segment. I was going to do this in the third. We're just going to move this here. We're going to keep it a simpler. It's a summer show. Keep it 2 segments. Professor Matt Moreno going to join us next. Shane, bonus question. You are happy for Jay Johnson that he is a national championship winning coach at LSU. Buy or sell?
I'm going to read one of my favorite. I follow this page on Instagram. It's like a disappointing affirmations. One of my favorites is, today I will take control of my emotions. I am choosing anger. I'm not. And you know what? Part of it goes back to, I'm sick as an Arizona sports fan, not just the University of Arizona, but all the Valley teams outside of ASU, of seeing players and coaches go somewhere else and winning championships. Like Bruce Arians. I like Bruce Arians. I have nothing against him. But I wasn't happy when he won a Super Bowl with the Buccaneers. I wanted him to win a Super Bowl here. We've never won a Super Bowl here in Arizona. And so from that perspective, I'm a little bitter, but I would still be happy for Jay Johnson if he had left Arizona the right way, and he didn't. He said some nice things about the school and the players on that team, that first team that got to the College World Series championship round when he was at Arizona. But you think about him trying to poach the players from Arizona, just not really acknowledging the university at all on his way out. Yes, I should get over it, water under the bridge, whatever. I don't want to, and I don't have to. I'm going to be bitter, and I don't like it, and that video, it says, it starts with, down here, salt is a way of life. Well, welcome to down here. That's where I am.
All right. So here's the thing, Shane. You're absolutely right on the way that he left Arizona. I did not think was done well. He should have acknowledged, thank you for, to the administration for the opportunity.
And by the way, like you said many times, he came on our podcast multiple times, and he was a great guest, and we appreciate that.
Right. And so I was going to get to that. So I don't like how he did that. I don't like how he was, didn't mention anything. I don't like how he went and immediately poached Jacob Berry. I understand it, but I didn't like it as well. With that said, you and I got to know Jay a little bit because he said, I'll come on with you guys anytime while he was at Arizona. I mean, he was nothing but gracious with us. He was the most gracious. He and Adia have been by far the most gracious coaches that you and I have come in contact with.
We're trying to get Adia back on the show, by the way.
That'd be great if we could do it sometime in July, because it'd be great to ask her about, her program.
Yep.
But she and Jay have been great with us on the podcast.
They were. Yeah.
Yeah. And so from that perspective, I thought it was cool to see him win a title. He didn't have any guys that, to my knowledge, that were former Arizona guys. Mm-hmm. You knew eventually he was going to leave. I mean, you don't turn down LSU, Shane. You don't turn down that job. The SEC has won 5 titles. Do you know, here's a trivia question. Since 2008, I believe, an SEC team has been in the championship game of college baseball's championship game or series every year but one. Do you know which one?
It had to be the Arizona Coastal Carolina game, because what the year in 2012 when Arizona won it, they played South Carolina.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So very good memory. I actually did not remember that they played South Carolina.
Yeah. My cousin went there, so I do remember. We had a little trash talk back and forth.
I can imagine. But so the SEC is the dominant baseball conference. You don't turn down LSU with the amount of money that they were paying Jay. It's a no-brainer.
And I understand that, and I agree with it. It's just funny because Arizona still won more College World Series titles than LSU has. It's Arizona. It's funny because the perception of Arizona as a baseball school is not that good, as good as it should be. If you just looked at all the banners, you looked at all the College World Series appearances and the championships, it's just kind of crazy. And you wonder, maybe it's just the inconsistency. Maybe it's frankly because ASU has overshadowed Arizona because they're one of the few schools that's actually won more. But it's, if you just looked at accolades, you think Arizona might be a more attractive job, but of course money talks. LSU has been a better, more consistent program lately. And so, no, again, I don't blame him for leaving. If Jedd Fisch decides to leave for greener pastures, I won't blame him either. I just hope that he does it in a better, classier way than Jay Johnson did.
Right. So it's not a bad thing when coaches leave Arizona in other sports other than men's basketball. Yeah. If Tommy Lloyd leaves Arizona, you start to wonder, what's up? Like when Sean Miller was flirting with Maryland, that was not good because Arizona, albeit Maryland has the Under Armour sponsorship, and I get that, but Arizona is a more prestigious, in my opinion, basketball school. Maryland may have more recent titles and whatnot, but I believe Arizona is more prestigious than Maryland based on
I think that one of the pulls for Sean Miller, he's kind of getting off the beaten path here, but one of the pulls there for Sean Miller was the possibility of going back to the East Coast because that's where he's from.
Fair.
But he wrestled with that for a while, which I get. And fortunately, Greg Byrne was able to convince him to stay, even though it was Jim Livingood who hired him, but it was Greg Byrne who apparently convinced him to stay at Arizona long term.
All right. So here's my final point on Jay Johnson. I'm disappointed in the Arizona fan base in general for all the negativity online. Jedd Fisch posted a tweet when LSU got to the championship series, something like that. And it was a cool tweet because he and Jay, remember that Jedd talked about working together, and Jay.
And then they left. Yeah.
And so people are criticizing Jedd Fisch when he did that.
No.
I don't love it.
Are you chastising? Is this a roundabout way to chastise me for my negativity?
No, because I don't think you said anything wrong. I don't.
No.
I mean, unless I missed one of your tweets.
No,
you didn't agree with me, but you
No.
didn't come out and said this guy, like this guy's a POS, like
No.
other people did.
I'm being completely upfront about it. I'm a bitter, salty, longtime state of Arizona sports fan, and this just contributes to my saltiness. That's all.
But you can't fault Jay for leaving. It's just the way that he left. Correct?
Exactly. 100%.
Okay. I think other Arizona fans should realize, hey, we had one of the best coaches here in a sport that maybe isn't considered our bread and butter sport. I mean, you weren't going to prevent a rising star like that from taking the money. And guess what? For all of you out there that say, I would have stayed at Arizona, no, you wouldn't have. If you had seen the paycheck come in from LSU, I mean...
And I think that's one of the reasons why Dave Hickey hired Chip Hale. I mean, not the only reason, but because, and we had Chip Hale on once, tried to get him on last season, didn't happen. But I had on before he started coaching at Arizona, but right after he got hired, and he said he hopes this is his last job because he loves the university. He's an alum, and I believe him. I believe he wants this to be his last stop. So I understand he hasn't had a lot of success, but if he got to the College World Series, I don't think he would be interested in going anywhere else.
No, and I get that, but he's also not as young as Jay. But guess what? If Chip Hale got offered twice the money that he was making at Arizona to take another job in the SEC, guess what Chip Hale's probably doing?
Yeah. No, I understand. I think a lot of times coaching hires in college, maybe even in the pros, but especially college, they kind of tend to hire the opposite of the previous person, and like a certain trait of their previous person. Like I think of ASU and Todd Graham as intense and in your face as he was. Then you transition to Herm Edwards, who's like completely the opposite and likes to delegate authority. And so a lot of times you want to go for the opposite. It's like almost like if you're dating. Well, I don't want to date someone like this again. I want to date someone who's like the opposite of this. Kind of the same thing with coaching. And I think Arizona went that way with Chip Hale. It was an out of the box hire, and we'll see if it works. But bringing it back to Jay Johnson, no problem with him personally. I just wish he would have handled things a little bit better on his way out of Tucson.
I'm going to make one not prediction here, just random Arizona prediction, but just put this in the back of your mind. UCLA has a bad year under Chip Kelly. I know they signed him to an extension, but let's say that the donors get upset. They're going to the Big Ten. Jed Fish is a former assistant there. Maybe they would consider bringing him on. And don't you think if Jed were to move there, that he would go after T-Mac to come back home and some of those other guys?
If Jed goes, I don't think it's going to be the next couple of years. I think it'll be a few years. I legitimately think he wants to stay somewhere for a while. Now, I'm not going to pretend like if he wins 9 or 10 games at Arizona and then a top SEC school or Big Ten school calls, I expect him to go. Okay. But I don't think that's going to be an issue for at least 2 years, probably longer. Just my opinion.
In this day and age, when a coach leaves, they're going to poach players. It's just a matter.
Yeah.
I think even if Jay had poached Jacob Berry, if he had been more grateful on the way out, maybe we would have felt differently. I don't know. We'll maybe ask the professor, Matt Moreno, his thoughts on Jay Johnson and a lot of great recruiting news, including a big potential commitment coming up next week that could change the course of Arizona football on defense. We'll find out more here on Wildcat Country.
What's up, Wildcat Country? It's Robbie G, baby, and I am gearing up for a big year with Coach Jed Fish and excited to see what the Arizona Wildcats do this football season. And just like the football team, we stepped up our program as well with the official licensed U of A Ice Shaker, baby. Check it out and get it at fanatics.com. Bear down, Arizona. Let's go.
Well, it's nothing like a midsummer edition of Wildcat Country when we have the professor, Matt Moreno from Rivals.com and GoAZCats.com join us. And by the way, before we introduce him even further, this is his record-tying 15th time on the program, tying our buddy Jeff Dean. So congratulations, Matt, for getting to that point. And thank you so much, most importantly, for joining Shane and I. So next Thursday, I believe it is a very big day for Arizona going forward with Elijah Rushing making his decision. 5-star, top 10 player in the country. How optimistic are you that he ends up down the street at Arizona?
It's a better chance than people are going to give it credit for. I think there's definitely a real possibility that it happens. I think going into it, if you ask me, right now who I'm picking Oregon. I just think Oregon's been the favorite for a really long time. once his brother left Florida, Florida kind of moved out of the picture and Oregon was right there. And so Oregon's been feels like the leader for a really long time. Talking to some people this week, a lot of feeling like it's trending toward Oregon. But I still think that there's a lot for Arizona. There's a lot there for Arizona. I think there's reason to be optimistic. I think there's reason to believe that it could happen. It just has to happen now. And so we'll see, what it looks like once it gets closer to the day that, Elijah Rushing is going to decide. But I think if Arizona doesn't win, it's not because they didn't try. I mean, there's been moments, with previous South Point players or previous in-state players where they didn't win out simply because they just didn't try. And so it won't be for a lack of trying. Arizona's done everything they can to get Elijah Rushing to stay home. They, he's got a commitment from one of his best friends and teammates. They have his brother on the team. They've they pulled out everything they can to try and get Elijah Rushing to stay home. So if he doesn't stay home, it's not for a lack of trying on Jedd Fisch and his staff's part. It is simply because he wants to go to Oregon. And so for whatever reason, I know there's gonna be a lot of, however you want to feel from fans, why he picked Oregon over Arizona in the age of NIL. But he genuinely likes Oregon. He talks highly of it. He talks highly of Arizona. And I think those are the two schools that you're looking at. I think it'd be pretty surprising at this point. If it's anybody else, I know Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame's fan base is not giving Arizona very much credit and saying it's a Notre Dame-Oregon battle, but it really does feel like it's Arizona or Oregon, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, Erica, to your point about Matt being such a frequent guest, I feel like he's the Steve Martin of this podcast because Steve Martin was never a cast member on Saturday Night Live, but he was on the show so often that it kind of seemed like he was. Matt's kind of like the third member of our team, so we appreciate it again. Along those lines, Matt, we see Arizona staff doing well, going toe to toe with bigger name football programs for these kinds of commits. Like they're in the mix here with Elijah Rushing with Oregon and Notre Dame and Tennessee. And Arizona's winning some of those battles too. Maybe they don't win this one, but they've won some for some, high ceiling 3-star guys and even some 4-star guys. How has Arizona been able to establish itself as a competitor for those recruits now compared to the previous coaching staff that was only getting commits from guys whose top offers were maybe from like Mountain West and MAC schools?
It's all about who you have on your staff. And I think Jedd Fisch knew that from day one. And I think he was strategic in who he brought in. And I think he brought in coaches that he knew had contacts in certain areas where Arizona needed to hit and do well in. And so far it's brought results. I think you're seeing a lot of the reasons why Arizona's building the classes it's building is because of who he has on staff. Even his latest additions, John Richardson is somebody who has a lot of ties to Southern California. And you're hearing a lot of the most recent recruits, especially the ones from California, bringing up his name. Armand Hawkins, a recruiting staffer, has a lot of ties to Southern California. You're hearing recruits bring up his name. And so I think a lot of that has to do with just who he has on staff. Scotty Graham is another one you hear a lot about. Jordan Powell you hear a lot about. It's a lot about who he has on staff. And I think that's been the biggest change is that he has active recruiters on his staff who are going out there and making sure that, these recruits know about Arizona. And, that's half the battle because when you're talking about, a lot of the West Coast recruits, Tucson is not the first place they're pointing to on a map. I think they think it's a lot closer to Phoenix than it is. And they kind of equate the two. And, it's just, you have to make yourself aware or make yourself be known and make the recruits aware of who you are. And I think Arizona's doing a really good job of that. I think that's been a big part of what they're doing. And then I think Jedd Fisch himself, he's a personable guy. And I think that's really resonating with recruits. I think they enjoy the message. I think they respect the message. And I think what you're seeing is that they're making it about the players. And, that's going back to his, mantra of making everything personal. And I think when they come out on these visits and these official visits, they're seeing things that they like and they're feeling very comfortable with, the coaching staff and around the program. And you hear a lot of the recruits will talk about this coaching staff, not as coaches, but as people who they feel like are uncles or family members to them. And that's a really big deal.
Let's talk about some of the commits that Arizona's lined up for 2024. And they added like 11, I think, just in the month of June alone, which is a crazy amount. And we broke down all of them. I probably need to bust out this half-gallon bottle of ice shaker. But so maybe we could talk about 2 or 3 from that group and that's committed in the month of June that you think might be able to make an instant impact when they get to Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, the first one we'll start with just right in Tucson. Keone Wilhite, I think, is a very, very impressive pickup for Arizona. There were some top programs from outside the region that were really trying to get him. Some other Pac-12 programs that are really trying to get him. I thought he might wait it out a little bit, maybe wait and see what Elijah Rushing did, or kind of just wait out his own process and see what it looks like come the fall when maybe some other programs get involved. But he decided to go with Arizona. I think that's a very big win. I think he maybe gets overlooked because there is so much attention on Elijah Rushing, but Kenny Wilhite is a very, very good player himself, and somebody that a lot of programs would be happy to have. And I think he's going to be someone to pay attention to and watch as he begins his Arizona career. Landon Bell, who flipped from Washington, a receiver who I think is very, very good. I watched him a couple weeks ago and still as good as the first time I saw him. I mean, he's a really impressive playmaker. Talking to some people, because he took that official visit to Arizona, decommitted a couple days later, then showed up to an event out in California, and talking to some people there, they were like, "Oh, this is interesting because it feels like it's going to be Arizona." And they go, "Well, you would think there'd be some other options, but Arizona was really kind of where he zeroed in on." And some other schools tried to get involved right after he decommitted, but it really felt like when he made that decision, you kind of knew what was coming next. But a very talented player. We have him close to 4-star status at Rivals. Someone who's going to add some size to the outside receiver position, can do a lot of different things. And I think someone who really wants to be at Arizona. I think he really enjoys the staff. Really gets along with the staff and some of those coaches that I mentioned. And I think that was a very big pickup. And then Moose, you know, you got to get a big offensive lineman. Anytime you have an offensive lineman who's nicknamed Moose, that's going to be a pretty good deal. And Justin Hilkema from California is a big dude. You watch his film; it's really, really impressive. You know, you can't go wrong when you're adding size up front, and I think Arizona, you know, has done a really good job with their offensive line. Maybe have missed out on a couple of their primary top offensive line targets, which I think is the thing that's maybe gonna have to change a little bit. But I think you buy yourself some leeway. You know, when you get someone like Raymond Polito last year, and you can bring him in and say, well, he was going to Alabama, now he's going to Arizona. Buy yourself some leeway if you're Brendan Carroll and his staff to figure some things out along the offensive line. But you know, I think they've done a pretty good job with the offensive line recruiting. But yeah, Moose is definitely someone I want to see, and it's going to be interesting to see kind of how he looks once he gets to college. But you can't teach size, as they say, and he's somebody who has a lot of it.
So, Matt, one of my favorite commits here, Michael Salgado Medina, who is a kicker. Now, you're probably, of course, you're smiling.
Eric loves kickers.
I always said, if I was a college coach, the first thing I would do is make sure I had a good kicker and punter, because so many teams are deficient in that area. Especially, you know, we've seen how many games won or lost by Arizona specialists over the years. What do you know about him? And is this a kid that you would expect to be one of those immediate impact players, assuming there's an opening?
Absolutely. Anytime you offer a scholarship to a kicker, there are high expectations, and you're going to earn that scholarship, and you're going to be put in positions right away to impact the game. And so I haven't watched him a ton. I've watched his games. I was watching other recruits, unfortunately, for the most part. Wasn't paying attention too much to the kickers and what they were doing. But from what I've seen from him, he's a solid player. You know, is considered one of the best by all the services that, you know, rank kickers, and we do it a little bit differently at Rivals. I know there's some confusion about how we rank them versus how kicking you know, websites rank them, but there's a lot more focus on those guys. We just don't get to see them very often. They don't, you know, a lot of the events that are turning up, you know, over the course of the spring and summer are not geared towards kickers. So they just don't get seen as much and evaluated. There's evaluated a little bit differently, but, you know, I trust a lot of those, you know, websites that focus just on the specialist, and you know, he's considered one of the best. And you know, Arizona decided to offer him a scholarship. I think he's someone who has some good range, maybe a kickoff guy, can also do some punting. So that's, I think, all around, if you're going to use a scholarship on a kicker like that, you want it to be one of the best guys. And for Arizona, he is one of the best guys out west. And so I think there's no hesitation from the staff to decide to use a scholarship. And to your point, yeah, I imagine he will step right in and be someone who gets on the field very, very early on.
I love that. That warms my heart to hear Arizona recruiting a kicker. Thank you, Jed. All right. So, Matt, I look at the Go AZ Cats and Rivals recruiting rankings. There's nobody listed as more than a 3-star among this class. Do you expect, outside of rushing, do you expect Arizona to land a blue chip player, potentially land a blue chip player in this class? Or is this one, would you characterize more for depth long term?
Yeah, it's definitely more of a depth building class. I think there's maybe some guys you could look at that you go, okay, that's maybe a little bit of taking a chance on a guy. You know, they're just, and it's not just rankings wise, it's offer wise too. You look at some of their other offers and you go, there's not a lot of Power 5 or Pac-12 schools on that offer list. But I do think the message has been sent that they really like all the players that they've gone after. I think they were deliberate in who they wanted to bring in. It feels like it is more about depth. I think the thing that everyone is still trying to figure out is how to best utilize the transfer portal. And so I think as each year passes, I feel like Jed Fish feels like he has a better grasp of how to, utilize the transfer portal, and feels like he can bring in, top guys from the transfer portal. And we've seen that, over the last couple of years, especially at the receiver position. Doing some really good things, bringing in top tier guys. So, I think it is about depth. There are some definite sleepers, I think, in this class. You look at someone like Adam Muhammad. I think, he's tucked away up there at Apollo High School, and I think people forget, if you're not from within Arizona, what type of season he had last year. And so really ended up looking at, Cal in Arizona, and you look at his tape and you look at his production, you go, okay, that's somebody that should probably be more looked at by some of these programs, and probably higher ranked. But I think it's going to be, I think Elijah Rushing is one of those guys that makes or breaks the class. And if you get Elijah Rushing, you really don't care what else happens, because that is the guy that Arizona has been missing out on for many years. Obviously had to watch, Bijan go on and go to Texas and become Bijan, who could go by one name. Obviously could do that for a long time in Tucson, but, nationally and in the NFL now, he's going to be, you're going to know who you're talking about when you talk about Bijan. And so, I think Arizona they can't have that happen. They don't want to have that happen where, the top guy is getting out of state or out of the region every year. And so, if they're able to get Elijah Rushing, I think it solves a lot of the problems, and you can live with whatever else comes in. But there could be, a 4-star guy here or there, but right now a lot of the attention is focused on Elijah Rushing and sealing him up and keeping him home. And that, I think go a long way towards the overall look of the class and the feel for the coaching staff about success or not success in this cycle.
Matt, as Eric noted last week, Phil Steele predicts that Arizona's defense is going to be even worse this season compared to last year. He has them last among all of the FBS teams in several defensive categories. Can you give us some reason for optimism based on the talent they've added in the offseason and guys who might be able to come in and make an impact on the field for this team?
I think it's going to have to start up front. I think there are some interesting pieces for the defensive line, and I think if you're going to look at them having success, I think it's going to be there. There are some question marks about the linebacker spot. You don't know what Justin Flo is going to look like. You assume and if he returns to Justin Flo of old and what he was as a high school player, he's going to be very, very good, and I think impact the defense in a big way. I think there's just maybe a few too many question marks on that defense, but I definitely like what they did up front. There was a clear focus on, hey, let's build the defensive line and replace, what they lost with some guys. And so I think that's going to be where the real key is if those guys are able to have success. It's obviously quite a few transfers that they brought in up front. I think that'll kind of dictate a lot of what happens, behind them and defensively, give them some elements. But, I like the young guys in the secondary too. I think those guys are, probably part of the reason why the thought is that they're going to be a worse defense is because they're a little bit of an unknown. A lot of them haven't played a ton, but I like what they're doing in the secondary, especially at corner. Ephesians Pricesock is, as good as they get. And I think he's going to impress a lot of people this year and kind of fill in with some other pieces. But the linebacker group is going to be where it's interesting and to see how they can come along. And, Leviticus Sua, you just don't know right now. I mean, he could be an X factor of this group because he can do a lot of different things, and he comes with, that high school experience. If he can get adjusted and pick things up quickly, which I think he can, I think that could change the complexion of what that linebacker group looks like going forward this fall. But I'll look at that defensive line, and if those transfers are able to kind of live up to what Arizona thinks they can be and kind of play beyond what they've shown so far, I think they'll be very, in a very good spot. Especially look at someone like Taylor Upshaw, who comes over from Michigan by way of Colorado for like 2 months. But I think if he's able to live up to what he showed at Michigan and impact the game like he did there, I think that's a very big pickup for Arizona, and somebody could really change the shape of the defense.
All right, man. My last question for you, and we appreciate your insight as always. What are you hearing from potential Arizona commits and even current commits as far as what the team did on the field last season? Because I contend that, the win at UCLA was the biggest in terms of getting that attention and maybe boosting recruiting. In terms of fan support, I think it was the win over ASU. But how big a deal were those victories, even though there was only 5, they're big 5, how big a deal were they to potential commits? And if so, like which games are they mentioning?
I've said this before, I'll say it again. Individual games matter way more to fans than they do to recruits. Yeah. I don't think I've heard a single recruit bring up a game from last year. I mean, It's just how it is. They just
the fact that they improved, does that matter?
I think so, but not as much. Again, not as much as fans think it does. I think it's more about what's going to happen this year. A lot of the commits are going to look at this season and go, okay, what does it look like this season? Do I want to step into a program that wins, 5 or 6 games, or do I want to step into a program that wins 10 games? I mean, that'll matter much more than what they saw last year. I think for these recruits who are committed now, are going to commit, they watched games last year and they went to games last year, but to them, they're looking and seeing what the scheme looks like and what the crowd is like and what the atmosphere is like. They're not really paying attention to the wins or losses. I mean, it just doesn't come up as much as fans think it does. I mean, yes, if they're like, at the Territorial Cup game and they saw a win or loss, maybe that impacts them. They remember that. But by the time you get to this point, you're talking about getting close to July. That's so far gone that it's just not really on their mind anymore. And so that's, I think, the biggest thing for fans and people who watch the teams to kind of get out of their mind is that you just view it differently than how a recruit views it. He's much more about who am I going to be spending my time with every single day, and do I get along with them and do I feel comfortable around them than if they beat UCLA or if they lost to USC or whoever. I mean, it just doesn't come up that much. And so I do think the biggest difference would be, did you win one game or did you win 10? If they're like, hey, we want to play for a 10-win team, they're going to notice that. If you're playing for championship, they're going to notice that. They notice the good much more than the bad. Where that comes in is other coaches. Other coaches might be reminding them, hey, look at how bad it was last year. And do you want to really play for a program like that? But it really just doesn't come up a whole lot. I think if you're winning 9 and 10 games, that's where it really, really matters. And it's more about the overall picture versus just, hey, I watched this game and I really liked what they did. Maybe earlier in the process, I think that matters a lot more, but it just doesn't come up all that much, individual games when it comes to recruits and what they're looking at.
All right. 2 more for you, Matt. Give me your worst case scenario for Arizona football this year, your best case scenario for Arizona as far as wins and losses go, and then your most realistic.
Okay. I think, I think 3 or 4 wins would be pretty worst case scenario. I think there's at least that many wins in there. It would be a step backward if they weren't able to reach that point. It would be not a good sign. I think best case scenario is probably 8 wins. I think there's some challenging parts of the schedule that I think are going to be difficult hurdles for Arizona to climb over. Even if things go completely well. I think anything outside of a bowl appearance is a disappointment for Arizona this season. I think they need to take that step. I think they are going to take that step. I'm thinking they're going to end up as a 6-win team. That's what it feels like. It's progress. It's not great progress, but it's progress. And I think they'll take that step forward and maybe just surprise some people and, hit 7 or 8 wins. But I just think the schedule is a little bit challenging in some spots and there's some different elements where you go, I just don't know that they can, even if they're playing their best, crash through that 8-win threshold. But, maybe they'll surprise some people, but I think 6 or 7 wins is doable and probably likely at this point. And you just take it from there and you take your chances in some of those games. And hopefully, if you're Arizona, you play some close games and maybe you flip some of those close ones and you can get closer to, 9 or 10 wins. But I'm thinking if you go 6-6, make a bowl game, it's progress and, you're feeling okay.
All right. Well, I listen, if they go 6-6, Shane and I are popping champagne on the podcast. So there you go. All right. So last question for you. You knew I had to throw in kind of a wild card question. Shane and I talked about this earlier. In your opinion, how should Arizona fans feel about Jay Johnson winning a national championship?
I was going to tweet something because I've always had a great relationship with Jay. I've appreciated, his openness with his program and our relationship. And so on a personal level, I was like, that's great for Jay. I know how hard he works. Mm-hmm. I know how much he lives and breathes baseball and how much it dominates his life. And you just feel good for someone like that who, put in the work to get to that point. But I also understand the Arizona side of it and how it went down. And I think you feel okay, but you go, man, it should have been Arizona. And that's kind of where I was feeling, when you're watching that play out, is it feels like Arizona should have got one of those and he should have done it Arizona. But, it's just part of the byproduct. There's a lot of things that play into it. There's a lot of different things that play into it. He obviously went to that school for a reason. They can afford to, put funds into the program unlike any other in that conference. And, it is what it is, but I think he's deserving of winning a national title. And I think he's put in the work to do it. But I was definitely thinking about Arizona fans watching that because I said that one of those should have been theirs. And we know which one and played out how it played out. But I don't blame fans for being bitter about it. It was definitely not, the best way to leave a program, but kind of is what it is.
Shane, any final thoughts on what Matt just said?
I think Matt said it better than I did earlier in the show, so I'll leave it at that.
Boy, you know what? Class is dismissed, and boy, that was a fantastic diplomatic answer by none other than the professor, making his 15th appearance on the program. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining us. For Matt Moreno, we appreciate it. Shane Dale, I'm Eric Cohen. Thanks for listening, and as always, bear down.